Today, we're taking a look at critical choices. Really critical choices made under, well, the most extreme pressure imaginable. We're talking about places where the margin for error is basically zero, where just, 30 minutes can be the difference between life and death. Exactly, and we're using Mount Everest as our sort of, ultimate case study here, trying to understand the brutal realities, the physics, the psychology of taking extreme risks. Yeah, it's a journey that starts high up on Everest, looking at these really harrowing stories of climbers who, sadly, paid the ultimate price. But our mission isn't just about the mountain. We want to take these very visible, very immediate dangers and see how they connect, maybe surprisingly, to risks we face every day. Things like, digital data exposure, things we often ignore, right? So we're diving into accounts that detail these fatal timelines, the tough ethical calls climbers face in what they call the death zone. And just to set the scene properly, because the scale's hard to grasp, Mount Everest, it stands at a staggering 29,032 feet. But the really critical point, the altitude that changes everything, that starts at 26,000 feet. That's the death zone. Okay. And what makes it the death zone? Well, the oxygen up there is incredibly thin. You're getting only about a third of the oxygen you'd breathe normally, like at sea level. A third, yeah. And your body just starts to shut down. It begins consuming itself because it can't repair or function properly with so little oxygen. So it's not just feeling bad, it's actively deteriorating. Exactly, it's terminal. You literally have a limited window, maybe hours, perhaps a day, if you're incredibly lucky, before your brain and organs start failing irreversibly. Wow. And this unforgiving deadline, this ticking clock, it's pretty much the key factor behind almost every tragedy we found documented in the sources. Okay, let's talk about that timeline then, because the first thing that really jumps out from all the accounts is this hard roll, right? The 2 p.m. turnaround time. Yes, absolutely, it's universally agreed upon, yeah? If you haven't reached the summit by 2 p.m., you have to turn back. Period. Why 2 p.m. specifically? It's all about getting off that exposed summit ridge before the afternoon weather rolls in, which it almost always does, and before darkness falls. It's a safety buffer, a buffer that some people ignore. Tragically, yes, ambition gets in the way. And the consequences are, well, absolute. Take the case of Frances Arsenev in 1998. It's just heartbreaking. She and her husband, Sergei, they were trying to be the first American woman to summit without bottled oxygen, right? Which is already pushing the limits incredibly hard. Exactly, an immense feat. And she did it. She reached the summit, but the time was 2:30 p.m. Just 30 minutes past the deadline. Seems so small, 30 minutes. But at that altitude, without oxygen after that kind of exertion, that half-hour delay meant they were descending right into physiological collapse as the conditions worsened and the sun set. And they got separated. Yeah, sources say they got separated in the dark. Frances was found later, way below the summit, totally disoriented. And Sergei, her husband, he actually went back up in the dark to try and find her. He disappeared. They later found he'd fallen, trying to get back to her. That seemingly small 30-minute delay essentially set off the chain reaction that led to both their deaths. It's brutal. Then we see this pattern again, don't we, with Cheruiyot in 2012. Right. Another climber who reached the summit late, also around 2:30 p.m. And this was despite her Sherpas apparently urging her repeatedly to turn back earlier. But she pushed on. The sources mentioned the huge investment she'd made. Emotionally and financially. Oh, like $100,000. Yeah, that kind of summit fever, that pressure can make people override the objective danger right in front of them. In the outcome, total collapse on the way down. She was slow, confused, had been climbing for almost 24 hours straight. Then she ran out of oxygen, a storm hit. She just didn't make it. The cost of pushing past that deadline is just final. You know, it's easy to think these are maybe less experienced climbers making mistakes, but the sources highlight the 1996 disaster, which involves some of the best guides in the world. Absolutely, that's a crucial point. Rob Hall, Scott Fischer, top guides leading expensive, well-organized expeditions, and both their teams missed the deadline that year. So even with all that experience and support, the mountain doesn't care how much you paid or how famous your guide is. The rules are the same. Rob Hall, who'd summited 4 times before, he had a client, Doug Hansen, reached the summit really late, 4 p.m. Wow, 2 hours past the turnaround, 2 hours. And Hall made that incredibly difficult and ultimately fatal decision to stay with him. He wouldn't leave his client. And then the storm hit. A massive, unexpected storm just slammed into the mountain, trapped them high up, around 28,700 feet. The sources talk about these desperate radio calls. Hall talking to his pregnant wife back home, knowing he was stuck, It just underscores the severity of breaking that 2 p.m. rule. Just devastating. And Scott Fischer's team, they were also summiting around that same late hour, close to 4 p.m. Fischer himself was apparently already exhausted, maybe sick. He'd used a lot of energy helping other people earlier on, so he was descending right into that same storm, already depleted. Exactly. Hypothermic, likely suffering from cerebral edema brain swelling. He actually told his lead Sherpa to leave him to focus on saving the clients. It comes back to this. The cost of ambition, of pushing past the time limit in the death zone, is absolute. Time runs out, oxygen runs out, and crucially, your ability to think clearly runs out. Precisely, that cognitive collapse is what really accelerates the physical horror. Yeah, the main enemy up there physiologically is hypoxia, the lack of oxygen. And it doesn't just make you tired or slow, it actively dismantles your ability to think straight. Your brain just stops working properly, pretty much. Above 26,000 feet, your brain struggles to process information, make rational decisions. Even basic self-preservation instincts can go haywire, which sounds terrifying, and there's a recent example of this, right? Joshua Cheruiyot in 2024. Yes, a really clear tragic example. He was a Kenyan banker trying to be the first African to summit without supplemental oxygen. A huge goal, and he got incredibly close, agonizingly close, just 160 feet below the summit. But that's when, according to the sources, his judgment just completely failed. What happened? He became confused, disoriented. His guide, Juan Sherpa, recognized the signs of severe altitude sickness and tried to get him emergency oxygen, the very thing that could save him. Exactly. But Cheruiyot refused it, flat out refused. His mind was so fixated on that goal summiting without O2 that he couldn't accept the one thing that might have kept him alive. That's the ultimate cruel irony, isn't it? The drive that got him there became the reason he couldn't be saved. It really is. He collapsed and died right there. And adding to the tragedy, his guide, gnawing, vanished in the chaos that followed. Never found. God, that's awful. And this loss of rational thought, it leads to some really bizarre physical reactions too, doesn't it? Like paradoxical undressing. Yeah, that's one of the most shocking effects of severe hypothermia. Yeah, your body gets so cold that the hypothalamus, the part of your brain that regulates temperature, malfunctions, and you feel hot instead of cold. You feel like you're burning up. So victims start tearing off their clothes, hats, gloves, exposing themselves even more to the lethal cold. It accelerates their death. We saw that with Francis Arsenev, didn't we? Horrifically, yes. After lying exposed for nearly 24 hours in probably minus 40-degree temperatures, the sources say the cold had, quote, messed with her brain. She stripped down to her base layers, and when Ian Woodall found her, she was alive, barely, but frozen stiff. Her muscles were rigid. He physically couldn't move her. And Scott Fischer, too, found with bare hands, jacket unzipped. Similar situation. The body's final, confused signals lead to actions that seal the person's fate. And this directly highlights the grim reality of rescue at that altitude. It's often just impossible. The logistics are overwhelming when Ian Woodall found Francis. Like he said, he couldn't move her. The deep snow, the altitude making exertion impossible, her frozen state. He faced this absolutely brutal choice, describing the sources, try to stay, which likely meant all three of them, including his climbing partner, would die or leave her to save themselves. An impossible decision. He had to leave her. And that choice underlines how even being relatively close to help means nothing if you can't physically bridge the gap. We saw that with Hannelore Schmatz, too, way back in '79. Right. An almost unbelievable story. She survived the night out in the open at 28,000 feet. Managed to descend about 330 feet the next day, and then collapse. Yeah, just asked for water and collapsed. And the truly heartbreaking part, she was only about 328 feet, basically the length of a football field, from the safety of Camp 4. She could probably see the tents. Almost certainly. But that short distance was completely insurmountable in her condition. Her body stayed there for years, a really grim landmark for other climbers, until a storm eventually blew it off the mountain face. These stories are shifting now, aren't they? From the physical and psychological limits to, well, the ethical ones. The mountain forces these terrible choices, but the next story is about something different. It's about people seeing someone in distress, someone potentially reachable, and choosing to walk by. Yeah, this is a really troubling case of David Sharp in 2006. He was the 34-year-old British climber, experienced, attempting a solo ascent. And he was found where? He was found barely alive inside a small rock overhang known as Green Boots Cave. It's at about 27,890 feet. Named, grimly, after the body of another climber, Siwang Polger, whose green boots marked the spot. Sharp was sitting right next to him, exhausted, freezing, fading fast. Who found him first? A Turkish team, on their way down. They gave him some oxygen, tried to help him up, but realized he was too weak to move on his own. So they continued down. Okay, but here's the part that caused so much controversy. This is it. Throughout the rest of that day, as teams were going up for their summit bids or coming back down, over 40 climbers are estimated to have passed David Sharp. 40 people saw a man huddled, clearly in distress, possibly dying, and kept going. That's the core of it. The sources say some offered minimal help, maybe some medicine, a quick attempt to rouse him. But most continued on their way, maybe assuming he was beyond help, maybe prioritizing their own summit, their own survival. It's hard to know exactly what went through each person's mind. One climber, Maxim Chaya, did stay with him for a while, but realized he was putting himself in danger and had to leave. But still, 40 people, you'd think some kind of coordinated effort. I mean, couldn't groups have relayed help even if one person couldn't manage it alone? Or did the sources suggest it was just every man for himself up there? That's a really key question. The sources repeatedly emphasize the state everyone is in at that altitude. Remember the cognitive impairment. Decision-making is compromised for everyone passing by. Right, hypoxia affects everyone. Exactly. So, while a coordinated rescue sounds logical down here, up there, stopping exerting the massive energy needed to even attempt to help someone immobile, it dramatically increases your own risk. Your oxygen depletes faster, you get colder, your own judgment suffers more. So it wasn't necessarily callousness, but maybe the overwhelming survival instinct combined with impaired thinking. The sources lean towards that interpretation. It's framed less as deliberate indifference and more as the brutal logic of the death zone kicking in. Focus narrows entirely to self-preservation. They saw Sharp, but their hypoxic brains screamed, "Summit" or "Get down safely." The capacity for complex, selfless planning might have just evaporated. David Sharp died there, seen by dozens. The reaction back home was huge, wasn't it? Massive outrage. Sir Edmund Hillary, the first man to summit Everest, was incredibly critical. He basically said that the priorities were wrong, that saving a life should always come before reaching the summit. He condemned the climbers who passed Sharp by. It really forces you to confront that ethical dilemma. As the sources put it, perhaps the hardest part of Sharp's death is that so many saw the danger and walked by. It shows how quickly empathy can just get crushed by the environment and personal ambition. Yeah. And, thinking back to Francis Arsenev, the visibility of these tragedies is part of the story, too. Her body remained on the main climbing route for 9 years. 9 years! Climbers just went past her. Yeah, she was tragically nicknamed Sleeping Beauty. Until Ian Woodall, the climber who had been forced to leave her behind, led an expedition back in 2007, specifically to move her body off the main route and cover her with an American flag, to finally give her some peace and dignity. But for years, the evidence of these failures, these tragedies, they're literally part of the landscape. Okay, so that point about seeing the danger and walking by, that feels like the pivot point, doesn't it? It brings us to the second part of this deep dive. On Everest, the risks are extreme. Immediate, you can see the danger, feel your body shutting down. Right. But in our everyday lives, we often walk past dangers that are much less visible, maybe slower acting, but still potentially devastating. We often ignore them. You're talking about the digital world now. Exactly. We seem to be much worse at perceiving chronic, slow burn risks compared to acute, obvious threats. Think about the slow creep of digital privacy erosion versus, a sudden storm on a mountain. So what's the parallel danger? Well, the sources describe this kind of chilling moment of realization many people have. You Google your own name, maybe your email address, and what comes back is terrifying. What do you find? Pages and pages from data broker websites, sites you've never heard of, listing incredibly personal information about you for sale. Like what kind of information? Your current phone number, old phone numbers, current and past addresses, your date of birth, property records you might own, sometimes even details about your family members, relatives, their addresses. It's all just out there, available for anyone to buy. Anyone. Marketers, sure, telemarketers, definitely. But also scammers, identity thieves, potentially even stalkers or people who wish you harm. They can buy this data, often for very little money, if it feels like a fundamental violation. But because it's happening online, kind of silently in the background, we don't see it like we'd see David Sharp in that cave. We just walk past it digitally. That's exactly the analogy. This is our hidden digital death zone. And data brokers are this massive, largely unregulated industry making billions by collecting and selling our personal lives as a product without our informed consent. Usually, without our knowledge. How do they even get this information? They scrape it from public records, social media, shopping sites, apps, credit reports. Basically, anywhere they can legal or sometimes maybe not so legally grab it, they compile these detailed profiles on millions, billions of people. And trying to get your information removed, is that even possible? Technically, yes. Laws often require them to have an opt-out process. But here's the insidious part. Much like, say, the false sense of safety on a clear morning on Everest before storm hits, they intentionally make the removal process difficult. It's often buried deep on their sites, requires filling out confusing forms, providing identification. It's designed to be frustrating and time-consuming. A bureaucratic wall. Exactly. Yeah, so most people just give up. The data stays up, available for sale. It's like the cognitive overload climber's experience. But for digital privacy, trying to manage hundreds of settings, dozens of opt-out requests, it's overwhelming. It requires a systemic solution. So if you can't fight this broker by broker, what do? You need something comprehensive, right? Something that acts like your digital safety team. Precisely. You need a proactive approach. The sources point towards needing an all-in-one digital security platform, something that tackles the problem automatically and continuously. Okay, what should that platform do? What are the key features? Well, the number one thing, kind of like respecting that 2 p.m. turnaround time, is prevention. That needs to automatically request the removal of your information from these data broker sites. And crucially, it needs to keep monitoring and repeating those requests because brokers often re-add data later. It has to be continuous, right? Not just a one-off cleanup. Definitely not. But it's bigger than just data brokers. Like needing multiple layers of gear on Everest, you need layers of digital protection. So a good platform needs an early warning system, like alerts. Yeah, alerts if your sensitive info passwords, social security number, bank account details pops up on the dark web. Oh, criminals buy and sell stolen data. Okay, that makes sense. What else? Real-time financial protection is key too. Getting immediate fraud warnings if there's suspicious activity on your bank accounts or credit cards. Before major damage is done, financial ruin can be just as devastating as physical harm. Absolutely. So, data broker removal, dark web monitoring, fraud alerts. What about basic tools? Essential. The sources mention things like a VPN virtual private network to keep your online activity anonymous, strong antivirus software for your devices, and a really robust password manager because weak or reused passwords are a huge vulnerability. Takes the human error out of it, removes that cognitive load again. Exactly. And then there's the safety net. Peace of mind, like knowing rescue is possible, even if difficult. The best platforms offer significant identity theft insurance. The sources mentioned figures up to $5 million, and really important, easily accessible 24/7 support, ideally US-based, to help you if the worst happens. So it's about proactive management, just like on the mountain. Respecting the risks, even if they're invisible, yes. The sources really drive home the need to take action. And often, the first step is just finding out where your data actually is right now. Many services offer a free scan or trial so you can see the extent of your exposure. You really shouldn't leave yourself vulnerable in this digital landscape. Hashtag tag outro. So wrapping this up, we've looked at these incredibly intense stories from Everest to really draw out this core idea, this parallel. Yeah, it seems whether the danger is right there in your face, like a storm hitting the death zone, or it's invisible, like your personal data being bought and sold online. Tragedy often comes down to ignoring a limit, failing to respect a timeline, or failing to see a risk until it's too late. On Everest, climbers pushed past physical limits, sometimes leading to that cognitive breakdown where they couldn't even accept help, like oxygen. And our digital tragedy, perhaps, happens when we fail to really acknowledge that our private lives are being turned into products. It's this pervasive vulnerability that, maybe because it doesn't feel immediate or physical, we collectively just walk past every day. We talked about the ethics of walking past a dying climber, someone visible to everyone. So here's the final thought we wanted to leave you with. Does this huge, mostly unseen industry of data brokerage, profiting from our private information without real consent, does that represent a kind of new silent death zone? A danger zone that we as a society are just choosing to ignore, choosing to walk past because the consequences aren't frozen bodies on a mountainside, but something more subtle, more digital. If the tragedies on Everest serve as stark, visible warnings, what kind of warning will it take for us to really address the systemic risks involved in the buying and selling of our digital selves? Something to think about. Consider the cost of that hidden vulnerability. Until next time on The Deep Dive, stay aware and stay proactive both out there and online.